y'all have already had a long day so far. So I'm going to try and make this as applied as possible. If you could just give me a minute, I'll just share my screen. Uh, can one of the hosts please enable screen sharing if possible? Would that be possible?
Ma'am, you can try now.
Thank you. All right. So before I get into, what sports psychology is and, what we do as sports psychologists, I just want to have a short discussion on, why is it important and where is it most applicable to us as performers, as individuals, or as athletes. Okay, I'm sure a lot of you have some competitive experience, whether that is in sport, whether that is, in an exam setting, in a performance setting like dance or any of the other performing arts. And I'm sure you've noticed that there is definitely a difference when you are practicing or when you are in training, when you are studying and revising versus when it is the actual event, right? There are different factors that come into play there. You hear a lot of people saying, I blanked out, I was not mentally there, I was not in the zone, I lost my calm. Okay, and all of these things are to do with the mind, but we still find people going back into their training settings and their preparation settings, and they will work harder on the physical or the technical aspect of their performance, right? Be it sport, academic, or any of the other performing arts. And I find very often people underestimate or overlook the importance of the mind in all of these aspects, right? And why is it so different is because the conditions during performance are completely different from when we are training or preparing ourselves. uh, there's no, obviously there's no opponent, there's no result, there's no time crunch. All of these suddenly come into play when you're competing and when you're performing in a real life setting, and our minds are not trained for that. And with that amount of uncertainty, with we don't know what we're going to face, what's going to lie ahead. What eventually happens is we let all of these thoughts get into the way and we're unable to perform. And that is why sports psychology is very, very important, almost as important as any of the other aspects that go into training and performance. I'd like to share a few stories with you to help you all understand this better. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Michael Phelps, one of the most decorated Olympians of all time. He has a total of around 28 Olympic medals, and he's known across the globe, right? But what a lot of people don't know is during the 2008 Beijing Olympics, he had already won, quite a few gold medals, and he was almost on the verge of making history before one of his final events, which was the 800-meter butterfly stroke. And just before, and he was preparing himself, and it was all over the news that it was the one event that was left, and there was a huge debate as to whether he would seal the deal with another gold medal. So imagine the amount of pressure on Phelps that this amount of time at an international stage, where the whole world is watching him. And what happened is, as soon as he jumped into the pool, he noticed that his goggles slipped off slightly. And I think by the 40-meter mark, he couldn't see with his right eye because there was water filled there. And then by 60 or 80-meter mark, he was swimming completely blind. I'm sure anyone in this situation would panic. I'm sure if I was competing back then, I would have panicked as well. Some people would have dropped out. We would have continued, but we would have been all over the place. But what happened to Phelps was that he continued, and not only continued, he went on to win, and he even set a new world record during this event. And after the event, there were a few news reporters that went to Phelps, and they asked Phelps, what was it like swimming blind, because that's what he was doing. And his response to them was, just like I imagined. And why did he say just like I imagined? Because the preparation that went into preparing, or the effort that went into preparing for that Olympic event, included not only his technical and tactical training, his physical conditioning, his nutrition, technical strokes, etc. But he also spent a considerable amount of time preparing his mind, right? There was visualization, there was stress management. He even, practiced under adverse conditions. He prepared for the worst situation, right? And that is why he was prepared when he was hit with such an adversity. And this is an example of how training your mind can really, really have an impact on your performance. Right. Another example, again, I'm sure we're all familiar with this athlete. He's Gerard Piqué, also known as Shakira's husband. In the year 2017, 2018, he made around 56 appearances for Barcelona, and he was valued at 14.7 million that year. So imagine the amount that he was paid per match. And during one of these really important matches against Real Madrid, so the El Clasico, again, very important match, important rivalry. A lot of people rooting for you, rooting against you. Everyone's watching you. It's telecasted live on TV. Again, highly pressurizing situation. And what happened to Piqué during this match was, in an attempt to defend, he ended up scoring an own goal. Right? Again, anyone in this situation would have lost their calm, I assume. It is a normal response, right? To be disappointed, to be angry or irritated or annoyed with oneself. But when it becomes problematic is when it interferes with our performance. And if we don't learn to move ahead and leave that in the past, we're going to be in trouble, because not only are we going to be distracted from the game, our team is probably playing with one player down, and that gives the opponents a huge, huge advantage, right? And again, that is why it's important to learn these skills, learn how to fix the problem and move forward, rather than fixing the blame and beating yourself down at that time, saying, how could I be so stupid? And I've messed up the whole game right now, and everyone's going to think I'm stupid. And these are automatic thoughts that do creep into our mind, right? Like the previous speaker mentioned as well. And we need to learn, this is not a skill that comes naturally to us, right? We need to learn, we need to train our minds to be able to move past that and focus on the things that are important for us. Because we all know we have a working memory, right? And the capacity of this working memory is very, very limited. And so if we are focused on things that are not directly related to our performance, we're not going to be able to have the resources, or the right resources for that performance. And that's when our performance will drop and our performance deteriorate. Another classic or recent example is Naomi Osaka. If any of you are following the French Open that is taking place right now, I'm sure you'll have heard of it was all over the news, where Naomi Osaka refused to speak to reporters, citing mental health, saying that she wanted to prioritize her mental health. And the committee fined her. They charged her with $15,000, and they threatened to ban her from the event. And in a very surprising move that surprised most of the world's athletes and media, Naomi Osaka chose to withdraw from the event. Even though it was a very, very important event, it was a Grand Slam tournament, but she chose to withdraw because she chose to prioritize her mental health, and that is so important in the long run. And I think it sets a brilliant example, right? Because very often we are concerned with what are people going to say, or what is at stake right now, and we overlook what it is costing us in the long run. And I think by taking that into consideration, and by prioritizing her mental health, not only in the present but even in the long run, Naomi Osaka has set a very, very big and very, very important example of the importance of mental health and your mind, even in sports, right? Because we're all no one's immune to poor mental health or mental illness, whatever it is. And by taking that stand, I think she did a brilliant job. Right? I'm not sure whether you'll agree with me or not, but yeah. Moving on. So if this is how important the mind is, a lot of people then also are known to over-assume the importance of the mind, right? If I train my mind, then I'm going to do very well, and I don't really need to put in the effort. physically or technically. Well, that's not true either. It has to be balanced. So for someone to perform at their best, there are four things that are important, right? There is the technical aspect. So you need to know your sport. You need to learn, the ropes. If it is hockey, you need to know how to dribble. If it is football, again, you need to know how to dribble and shoot and pass, whatever other technical skills there might be. There's tactical, which is your strategy. You need to plan. You need to go into the match with a game plan. You need to go into your performance with a game plan. And obviously, there's the physical. You need to be fit. You need to have stamina. You need to nourish your body with the right nutrients, etc. And then there's also the mind. So it's these four aspects that come together that enable a performer or an athlete to give their best performance or to come as close to their best performance as possible. All right. Now, another misconception in the field is that an athlete works with a sports psychologist or with a psychologist only when she or he has a problem. Well, that's not true either, because you don't go to a coach or you don't study because you are weak at the subject. You do it to improve anyway, right? You don't have athletes like Virat Kohli or Sunil Chetri say, I'm not going to go into training today because I'm a good player already. I'm a good athlete already. They still go in, they still continue working hard because there's always room for improvement, and because they want to be able to have the skills to face any situation that they may be faced with on the field. And that's the same with your mind as well. You don't have to experience anxiety to learn how to manage your thoughts and emotions, right? You can learn that and develop that as a skill beforehand, and then use that whenever you're faced with a particular situation that requires that skill. So you're building your scoping skills, right? Another question that I get is, what is the right age to start training my mind? I personally believe it's never too early. It's never too early. Yeah. I have athletes that are 9. I've worked with athletes that are younger. Obviously, the focus of our work would differ. So when the athletes are younger, when they're at the grassroots level, we focus on developing the skills that would help them participate in sport. The focus is not on competition. It's on enjoying. It's on building the right attitude. It's on healthy competition, right? Learning not to let failures or dips in performance affect how you see yourself as an individual, right? And all of these skills would then form the base for when you go into the competitive level. That's where our focus in terms of training is on performance. So we would work on, attention, visual fields, decision making, and all of these complex things, right? So the area of work would differ depending on the age of the athlete, the sport that they play, the competitive level that they're at, and all of these different factors would then help us determine what work or what we need to do with the athlete. All right. So what exactly does a sports psychologist do? I'm not going to go into the definition of what sports psychology is. It's obviously we all know it's the study of the mind in performance and in sports settings. And it is to do with motivation and confidence and goal setting and all of these things. But our primary goal is athlete welfare and athlete performance, right? What does this mean? It means ensuring a safe environment when the athlete is training and when the athlete is competing, right? So their coach-athlete relationships, their relationships with teammates, how they view, how safe their environment is. And when I say safe, I don't only mean safe physically, but even psychologically and mentally, right? Am I safeguarded with my emotions, with my emotional and psychological safety? Is the coach being too harsh on me, breaking me down as an athlete? These are things that we're concerned with, right? In training as well as in competition. Next is well-being, even when they're away from the game, right? So some sports psychologists, if they have that kind of training, can even work on areas that are not directly related to sports, right? So how are they, managing in their personal life, in their social life? Are any of those factors influencing their sport performance? And we may choose sometimes to prioritize those areas before working on areas that are related directly to performance, like motivation and confidence, right? We may choose to work on, body image, or we may choose to work on how they view themselves as individuals before looking at it specifically in a sports context. And finally, very obviously, achieving their performance goals. At the competitive level, performance is important, it's important for them to move forward, to make progress. And obviously, we help them achieve some of these performance goals by improving their performance and tracking their progress for them. Yeah. So that's what we do as sports psychologists. How do we do that? There is a process that we follow, and this can be done on field, this can be done off field. We can work individually with the athlete one-on-one, or we can work in a group setting. If it is a team, we can conduct workshops, we can conduct skills-based workshops, teaching them how to motivate themselves or how to set goals. But the most common is the one-on-one individual consulting, and this is the process that we normally follow. First is an intake assessment. Now this may be a case, understanding the case, understanding the performance history, personal history of that athlete. If they are younger, that is below 18, we involve the parents as well. Involving the coach here is also very, very helpful. We may or may not use pen and paper tools. So tests on anxiety, tests on confidence. Personally, as a practitioner, I don't use them. I rely on an in-depth interview, a discussion, as I call it, with my athletes. After assessing, I profile the athlete. So we try and map or note down all of the skills, technically, tactically, physically, and mentally, and strategically and psychologically. And we see where the athlete sees themselves right now and where they want to be in maybe 3 to 6 months. And we note down exactly what kind of improvement we want to see, right? So it gives us something to track. Psychoeducation is a very important part, right? Helping them understand what is happening, helping them understand, the reason behind it. For example, performance anxiety. A lot of athletes complain about feeling uneasy in their stomach, and they say it's like I have butterflies in my stomach and my heart rate increases. And some of that is normal, right? Because when we warm up, the same thing happens. That's adrenaline moving in our body. That's why we feel the tingling sensation. And with all the changes happening in our body, the tingling sensation in our stomach is normal. The increased heart rate is normal because our heart needs to pump more blood to our muscles to perform. But when this blows out of proportion and interferes with performance, that's when we work on it. So psychoeducating them about the process of why we feel what we feel is, again, very, very important. Then we set goals with them. So let's assume I have an athlete who is, who loses their calm on court, gets very irritated, gets very annoyed. We're going to set a goal saying, okay, when I make a mistake, that's one situation where I get annoyed with myself, where I get irritated with myself. Can my goal be to be disappointed so that the intensity is lower? I am not beating myself up on court mentally, and I'm focused on my performance. That would be the goal, right? It doesn't always have to be overly positive, because disappointment is a natural reaction to making a mistake, right? But can it be a functional negative emotion instead of a dysfunctional or unhelpful negative emotion, right? So our goals are very realistic in that sense. Then we introduce the intervention. So that could be, let's assume, rational emotive behavior therapy, or it could be psychological skills training or counseling, or it could be anything, depending on the needs of that athlete and obviously the practitioner's training. And as we work with the athlete to improve that particular area, we are constantly reviewing and evaluating to make sure that the intervention is working. We continuously check with the athlete to see if it's helping them. In terms of applying any new techniques, we always apply them in training sessions first and then into competitive situations, because learning takes time, right? When it's new, you need a lot of your working memory. You need to concentrate too much on that technique, which would take your focus away from your performance, which is why once we get comfortable using it, once we reach that state of automaticity with using that technique, that's when it's best to apply it in a competitive situation. All right. Performance anxiety, one of the most common areas that I find myself working in. And what happens with athletes during performance anxiety is, I want you to quickly just think about a time when you were anxious, when you were nervous, and think about what was going through your mind at the time, right? And you will find that you were in one of two places, or maybe both. You were either in the past, okay, the last time I was in this situation, this is what I did. I hope I don't do it again. Or you're in the future. what if I mess up? What if I make a mistake? What is ABC person going to say? Right? We're either in the past or we're in the future, and we rarely ever are in the present, which is where we need to be able to use maximum of our mental resources to perform, right? And that is why we find ourselves, performing poorly or our performance deteriorating when we are nervous and anxious. Okay, so helping athletes understand this and then putting in the right intervention to help them become more mindful is what works in most cases. Obviously, it depends on each individual athlete. Okay, so very briefly, this is what working as a sports psychologist would mean. Again, this is what an applied sports psychologist would do, but you can choose to get into research, right? You can get into academics and teaching. Personally, I am an applied psychologist, but I also teach at at a postgraduate diploma in sports psychology, and so you have all of these avenues open to you. In terms of qualifications or working as a sports psychologist, you do your undergrad, your bachelor's in psychology, and then you would go on to do a master's in either psychology or sports psychology. But it's helpful in either case, especially if you do a master's in psychology and not specialized in sports psychology. It's helpful to get some kind of specialized training or work under a sports psychologist, because the concepts and the way we apply some of these theories are very different from applied psychology, and it helps to get that experience and that knowledge base of using these principles of psychology in a sport and performance context, right? But in India, at least, you don't need a specialized master's in sports psychology to practice as a sports psychologist, at least not yet. You can very well work as a sports psychologist even with a master's in psychology. At the end of the day, it all comes down to whether you feel competent enough, whether you have enough training and experience to be able to manage the cases you have. Even within sports psychology, you might still have your limitations, right? So if you have only trained in sports psychology and in consulting, you may not have the experience of working with clinical cases, for example, eating disorders in sport or clinical depression in athletes. That's when you would identify and refer to the concerned person, maybe a clinical sports psychologist or a clinical psychologist, right? So that they can take over. Because we're dealing with a person here and we wouldn't want to step out of our area of expertise or competence. Personally, in terms of how I went on with my training, education, and work, I graduated from St. Xavier's in Mumbai with psychology and sociology. So I wasn't a full major, and which is why after my bachelor's, I went on to do a master's in applied psychology from the University of Mumbai. Unfortunately, at the time of my graduation, I also had to drop out of sport because of an injury, and I couldn't continue. But I played hockey and I did track and field. High jump was my main event. And you don't need competitive experience to be a sports psychologist. You don't need to be an athlete to work as a sports psychologist, but the experience definitely helps because you understand then what some of your athletes or your clients are talking about. But I think you can very well use experiences from any performance situation, right? You've all given exams, you've all presented in front of large crowds, and so you know what it feels like to be there, right? While I was doing my master's in applied psychology, I went on to do a few training programs in sports psychology to help me understand what the field is like, because I was very new to it back then. There weren't many sports psychologists in the country, and there weren't any recognized degrees either in the country. And so I trained with sports psychologists. I did internships, I did training programs. I got an opportunity to go on field and see what it is like working with a sports psychologist. And after that, I chose to, I thought I didn't have, the information, I didn't have the training to work as a sports psychologist with just that master's, and so I decided to get a specialized training in sport and exercise psychology, which is why I went to the UK. I studied at Loughborough University in Leicestershire, and I did an MSc there. It was a one-year course, and I chose that deliberately because I already had a 2 years master degree behind me. But if you're considering going, straight out for a master's in sports psychology, there are other countries you can look at as well. There's Canada, there's the US, there's Australia, and a lot of the European countries as well. Right? How do you choose your university? How do you choose the course that you're going to study at? Uh, the best thing to do is to do research online. Obviously, you can visit consultants, but it's always helpful to also do your own research. Pull up these university ranking lists, for example, do a quick research on, the best sports psychology schools or sports science schools in the particular country that you're looking at. This is if you're looking at studying outside, right? Open up their websites, look at who's teaching, your faculty, look at the university standing, whether it's recognized by any institute, for example, in the UK, whether it's recognized by the BPS, which is the British Psychological Society. In America, it would be the American Psychological Association, and so on. Compare the modules, because what you would be studying would be different from one university to the other. So make sure you look at that as well. And then on the basis of what you find interesting, or which faculty's research work you are more interested in, that would help you shortlist your university. And then obviously fees would also be a huge deciding factor, because the fees for each university would differ, right? Some might offer you scholarships, etc. If you choose to study in India, there are a few degrees that have come up over the last few years. There's Guru Nanak Dev in Amritsar that I'm familiar with. And there are a lot of other diplomas and certificate courses. So you can do a master's in psychology and then choose to do, a diploma, postgraduate diploma in sports psychology. But I think, again, a quick Google search will help you, and then you can call up the colleges and check with them. And in terms of working, another question that I get: what is the scope? Do sports psychologists get employed? Is it easy to find a job? Obviously, the pandemic has made it difficult for a lot of people, not only psychologists, but even other professionals. But organizations and academies are now making space for sports psychologists. Sports Authority of India is the largest recruiter of sports science professionals, including sports psychologists. There's, All India Football Association, All India Football Federation, that recruits sports psychologists, sports science professionals. There's Reliance that recruits sports psychologists. So there is, a lot of scope, and you don't do too badly in terms of getting paid as well. Of course, the climb may be slow for some, but you get there eventually. And you can also choose to freelance, or set up your own consultancy, or set up your own individual practice. But that's where you have to go out. You have to go on field, visit people, make contacts, build your network, and get in clients, right? So if there is a tournament happening at a particular club in your neighborhood, go down there, talk to parents, talk to athletes, introduce yourself, explain what you do, offer to do in your initial days, obviously, when you're just starting out, offer to do a free awareness workshop. Of course, when I was starting out, I had to do a lot of free work because not too many people knew what sports psychology is. But people are ready to pay right now. If they don't, then sometimes you can take a call whether you want to offer, free 30-minute workshop to help them understand what it is, or you can charge them a minimal fee, registration, 100 rupees, so that there's some kind of commitment. How you do it is completely up to you. But these are the ways you can go out on field, network, get to know people, introduce yourself, and that's how you build your clients. And of course, then clients talk to other clients, and then people get in touch with you via referrals. Another way is you can network online. There's LinkedIn. You can get in touch with coaches. A lot of people are online right now, and you're not only limited to working within your state. With technology, you can work across the country and even internationally, right? I have a few clients who are all over India. I have clients who are outside India as well. And if you have the skills, if you are competent, and you're the expert in that area, then you can really work and do a lot of good work, right? So I hope I was able to explain to you all what sports psychology is, what working as a sports psychologist would look like, and what is the pathway to becoming and training yourself become a sports psychologist. I think that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was very insightful as this is an upcoming field and not many people are completely aware of it. So all the questions that you answered, it was very informative. We'll take up a few questions. So one of the questions is, can the quality of leadership and team building be developed by training?
Definitely. I think, when a lot of athletes come in together, they're all coming from, different places, especially in a country like India that's so diverse. We're coming from different, parts of the country. And with some of our leads right now, we even have international players. And so training the team to play together as one is very, very important. And you can actually see the difference really, when a team has that good dynamic, and you can definitely train it. There are a lot of, I don't know if, some of the students here are studying social psychology, but a lot of social psychology can be applied there to group dynamics, etc. So yes, you can definitely train it. One way is to, do some group sharing activities, mutual disclosure, letting people connect not only, superficially, but at an emotional level. And when you have players that really connect, it really shows on field. So yes, my answer would be yes.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Another question is, if you do not have a sports background necessarily, and if you want to come into the sports psychology field, and say you're interested in more of the research work, what would that involve?
Right. So unfortunately, there isn't much sports psychology research that is based in India. Each university that you're affiliated to would have a different process. Um, so, for example, if you are, a student who is studying, you may not always have, you may be studying at your, master's level for an applied psychology degree. You have a lot of conferences here. You can do research there. Then you can choose to publish that data. For example, you can write to international journals, and a lot of them accept these papers if you follow the right guidelines. So get your ethics approval from the right board. I know in India there's Monk Prayogshala that has a ethics review board. So if you just write your research and send it to them, they will review it, and then you can write to a journal, whether it's Indian or international, to publish that work. You don't necessarily have to have sport, be an athlete to be able to do this, but you need to have access to athletes because that would be, your sample. So yeah, you don't need the experience, but this is how you would go about doing it. A PhD is another option if you want to get into the research work after your master's. You do an MPhil or you directly do a PhD, and that's the way to research in sports psychology or any field really.
Right. So you were mentioning, explaining us earlier about Naomi's case that recently happened. Now, since social media has come into the picture, athletes are, constantly scrutinized for their performances, be it good or bad. They get extreme ends for both.
Right.
So when it comes to, small failures, because as an athlete, you're bound to face failures at some point. So how do these athletes, cope with such stresses? And how does a sports psychologist come into the picture and help them through the process?
Right. So the approach would really differ from psychologist to psychologist, and it would rely heavily on their approach. Professionally, I am trained in REBT, so I use that primarily, but then of course it depends on the needs of my athlete as well. So to give you an example, if, and people have opinions all the time, right? Even when I came on today, I think before I spoke, a lot of you seen my face and have some opinion about that, and that's uncontrollable. And so some people verbalize this as well, and that's what we see with the media and on social media with people's comments and the things that they say. And I think athletes and individuals in general can be taught to realize or to notice the difference between facts and opinions. Right? Opinions aren't necessarily true. It's how we see things. It's our perspective. It can differ, and even if it is true, because failures are inevitable, right? The world's greatest athletes have failed at some point in their life. No one was born, a great athlete, and no one stayed up there for very, very long either. And so, just understanding the inevitability of it, again, working on thoughts and beliefs, because ultimately our thoughts and beliefs affect how we feel and how we behave in situations, right? So if we can identify the unhelpful patterns and then work on making them more helpful, they don't always have to be overly positive, right? So if I have terrible performance, I'm not going to say, yeah, I'm happy about it. That's not possible. I can feel disappointed. I can feel regret. I can feel anger towards myself, as long as it's healthy anger. It's qualitatively different from unhealthy anger where I act out and lash out, etc. If I can learn to do that, to learn to identify the thoughts that are responsible for those unhealthy emotions and behaviors and change them to thoughts that are helpful, more rational, that's how we can help athletes cope with these situations.
Right. So there's a question by Devyanshi. If a person is addicted to drugs, is it possible that they will get a clean chit in sports?
So doping in sport is a major area. Unfortunately, that's not an area that I specialize in. But with the knowledge that I have, if I was working with a team and I found an athlete, who was using some kind of substance, I would work with the athlete to obviously understand the nature of the history of use and the severity. And then depending on my assessment, I would choose to refer the athlete, or depending on whether it's an individual athlete or whether I'm working with a team, a lot of other things come into play, whether I report them to the management or whether I can work with the athlete, because there's always a chance of getting tested. They have these random drug tests, and if you're found using any of these, then you're going to be banned. You're going to lose all the reputation you have. So, the different protocols for different situations. Unfortunately, that's not an area that I'm formally trained in, and so I would refer to someone who's trained to handle such situations. I'm sorry, I couldn't be of more help with that question.
Okay, no issues. So another question is, athletes might not have best days every time, and they might feel emotionally drained at times as well. But during performances, they are, expected to give their best. So how do you train them to sort of have that, when they feel emotionally drained, to give their best performance?
I think that's where Naomi Osaka's example also comes in. I would personally never force my athlete to perform when they're not mentally there, or when they are emotionally drained, because I've had athletes who had to retire from matches because they couldn't continue, because when you're drained, it's going to show. What we can do is train the athletes to identify when they're overworking themselves, when they're approaching burnout, so that they don't reach that stage, right? However, if they do reach it, I think the best thing to do is to think about, what is best for them then. Is the performance really important, or is their mental health or physical health, whatever the case be, is that more important at that time? And then helping them, I would never decide for the athlete personally, just sort of helping the athlete see it for what it is, and then help them make a decision about it, is what my approach would be. Personally, if I was competing and I got to a point like that, I would take a step back and take some time off. Performance is important for a lot of people, but not at the cost of health, physical or mental health.
Right. So when it comes to physical injuries as well, during their recovery period, where do you step in and help them with the recovery process?
Right. So sports psychologists can work in injury prevention as well as recovery. When it comes to prevention, stress is a huge contributor to injuries. Attention is also one of the factors that could lead to injuries. So really training this aspect can help with the prevention. Of course, you can't guarantee that they would never be injured, but you can always help with reducing the chances. When it comes to rehabilitation right at the start, because as soon as an athlete is injured, and in most cases if it is a bad injury, they have to take a step back, take some time off. Sometimes there are some rapid and drastic changes as well. Just helping them cope with that, or come to terms with it, because acceptance, it's similar to the stages of grief. Like, first you need to accept what has happened, and then there's denial in most cases. In some cases, there's also, it hasn't sunk in yet that I can never play sport. I have to step out for a year or a few months. And so just helping them through that process. Sometimes they can feel isolated because they were part of a team and now they're not.
Mhm.
There's fear of, say, losing their place on the team. What if I am replaced? Because people will now view me as weaker. Coping with not being able to be up there when they eventually get back to performing. So I'm going to perform now, but there's a possibility that I'm not going to be as good as I was, and it's going to take me time to climb back there. So just dealing with all of these different situations is where a sports psychologist comes into the rehabilitation process. And from personal experience, it's very, very, very important. I did not have it back then, but yeah, it's very, very important for to be able to really overcome, because if you don't work through the psychological rehabilitation process, there could be a high fear of re-injury. So you could be
Mhm.
physically fit, but you are holding back because of the fear of re-injury or new injury in most cases.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's another question. So if you want to pursue sports psychology but not necessarily work in India and you're looking at abroad as your options, so what are the things to be considered when you want to pursue your career abroad?
Right.
Psychology.
So I've already spoken about the application process. So you do research about the duration of your degree. What are your visa requirements in that country? So I can talk about very few countries because of the research that I did. So the UK, for example, because that's where I've studied. You do the 1 year masters um, from a BPS recognized university.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then that's considered stage 1. Okay, stage 2 would be supervised training. So you need to complete a few hours under the supervision of trained professionals. But back then when I studied, we only had 4 months after our degree ended. So my degree ended in September. I had until the end of Jan to stay in the country and look for a job. uh, Getting a job as a psychologist without a license is not very high. um, and so a lot of people then opt to pursue a PhD, and they do their PhD part time, and they do their stage 2, that is supervised training, part time. Once you have that status, once you are chartered by the BPS, that's when you can work as a sports psychologist in the country. In terms of visas, I think your employer would have to support you. I'm not sure what the other options are. The other pathway, the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences, they have another pathway similar. So you do your masters and then you do
Mm-hmm.
a training from a basis qualified professional. That's how you get a job. There were talks about extending the 4 months in UK after your degree completion to 2 years. I don't know if that's still the case, but I'm sure a consultant will help you out with that. And it's almost similar in most countries, including Canada, Australia, and America. You do your masters, you need to do your supervised training, specific amount of hours to give an exam, and then you can get your license to practice there. Canada gives you 2 years after your degree. Australia also gives you 2 years after your degree. And the US gave you, I'm not sure what the rules are right now. And with the pandemic, I don't know if any of that has changed, but that's usually the process. Your master's, supervised training, and an exam to get your license abroad.
Right. So Nandita asks, what inspired you to take up sports psychology?
I think for me, it was having that experience in sport. I was always drawn to psychology. I knew I always wanted to do psychology, and I thought it was clinical, like most people think it is when they are young. And I worked with children as well through most of my education years. And when I actually found out what goes into working as a clinical psychologist, I realized I wasn't really interested in it. And it was about the same time I was introduced to sports psychology, and I said, why not, let me just get in touch with a sports psychologist and see what it is, because I knew how important it was, but I didn't know whether I would like working in the field. And I loved it. It was as though I was back into sport, competing and training. And a lot of my work is on field, of course, not right now, but I work on field as well with athletes, applying some of what we discuss in sessions to their performance. I do a lot of observations and match analysis. So, just sitting down in an office or in a clinic was not something that I enjoyed, because I
Mm-hmm.
spent most of my life on the track and on the field. And that's how I decided that I want to explore the field. Obviously, I didn't know whether I would make it as a sports psychology, and my applied psychology degree was always my backup. But I never needed the backup really. it's been a great field to work with.
Right. So, another thing is, since this pandemic has started, everybody is, using online spaces. How has that affected us, the sports psychology area?
Uh, Personally, for me, not a lot. I know a lot of sports psychologists who've just graduated are struggling a little bit in finding work because, like I said, how we find work is go out there, network, get people to know
Mm-hmm.
us. But you can also network online. To be honest, there's LinkedIn and there's Facebook groups with different sport academies, etc. You can call them up and introduce yourself, send across a profile, a CV. So you just have to network online right now. It really hasn't affected work because athletes are still training. They may not be training with the same intensity, but competitive athletes are still training because they don't want to lose form. So work really hasn't stopped. It's just not on field anymore as I would want it to be. It's like this, which for me is not as enjoyable, but I like the work that I do, so I get by. It really hasn't affected the field much though.
Mm-hmm. So, is there any advice you would like to give to the budding sports psychologists?
Um, I think I would say if sports is your passion, then definitely you know, look into the area, see what see what opportunities are out there, and don't be disheartened if you don't get a lot of work initially because that's just the process of working. As a sports psychologist, you might call 10 people and 9 people might say no. Sometimes all 10 might say no. You just need to call the next 10 people and get in touch with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just like in sport, you have to keep at it. You can't be, if you are, um, you know, thrown down by a lot of the experiences you have, just keep going and you'll get there at some point. So the same principle that applies to sport, working in the field of sport.
Right. So, as any student from psychology usually faces a lot of problems when it comes to internships or training. So, when it comes to sports psychology, how do you take that first step into this field after your, theory part of it is done?
Right. So I don't think you have to really wait for the theory part to be done. You can always get in touch with sports psychologists, ask if they're looking for interns, but read up about the work that they're doing because it needs to be interesting to you as well, and need to get something out of it. Call them up or write to them and introduce yourself, introduce why you want to do, why you're looking for an internship in the area. Ask whether they have internship opportunities, ask what kind of opportunities. From experience, I know that you won't be able to sit into individual sessions, of course, because of confidentiality and maintaining anonymity. But there's a lot of content development, so you can actually be introduced to a lot of theory even through an internship, right? And it would be theory and then application of that theory. So I use a lot of we do have training programs as well. A lot of psychologists conduct training programs. They can be paid or unpaid, where they teach you the theory and then they teach you to apply it. So maybe look some of those up. You have case discussions with your the psychologist who's letting you intern with them, and that's how you learn really by applying it and all of that.
All right. So, in India, since sports psychology is only coming up, and a lot of people might not take it seriously as much as the traditional ones, clinical and counseling. So, what do you think we could possibly do to make people more aware, and even the athletes and people in sports, that sports psychology is very necessary for them to grow in this field? Yeah.
Right. I think sports psychology has definitely grown. A lot of people know about it right now, but the knowledge is more curative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the response you'll get is, I don't have a problem yet. When I do, I will come see you. So I
Mm-hmm.
think awareness about sports psychology is there. Awareness about how it can help you even in the preventive stages is what needs to be focused on right now. Help them see that you don't have to have a problem. You don't need to be faced with a problem to work with a sports psychologist, or even a psychologist really in today's day and age, right? Mental health is not the same as mental illness. My
Mm-hmm.
mental health could be good, it could be poor, depending on my everyday experiences. And if I work with a psychologist, sport or otherwise, I just have the skill set to deal with that and make sure that I'm taking care of my mental health. Same thing with performance. I may not have a problem, but I can learn the skills to make sure I can cope with the situations that I would ever face. So that kind of awareness is what needs to be that needs to go out there right now.
Right. Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. It was really amazing. Like, I personally didn't know much about sports psychology as such. So this session has really helped me to, understand this field more. And now I would like to hand it over to Sonia to thank you and give you the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And let me tell you, it's not my opinion. It is a fact that this was a supremely interesting and informative session. And through your immense knowledge and experience, we definitely, like how Gloria told, we definitely got to know a lot about what goes into the world of sports psychology. So, as a token of our love and appreciation, I would request our tech team to present to you with an e-certificate.
Thank you.
Ma'am, this will be mailed shortly to you.
No problem. Yeah.